if each of you are aware of what attachment style you have, how it shows up, and what your needs are, and you're willing to navigate it together, you can work through it. This is the B is For podcast, and I'm your host, Bria Villa. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of the B is For podcast. I'm your host, Bria Villa, and today we are going to get into it. I'm in my cute little grout outfit. I wanted to be comfortable today because we're getting into a topic that is really fresh for me. I thought that I knew my attachment style like this whole time. And I retook an attachment style test right before filming this episode because I wrote out the outline. As I was reading certain things, I was like, wait a second. This sounds more like me than what I thought sounded like me. And I was like, hold on. Do I know my attachment style? So I retook the test. Come to find out, it's actually a little bit different than what I thought it was. So we're going to actually be processing this in real time. But as I'm sure you already know and have figured out, today's episode is about attachment styles. And the B is for behind the behaviors. Double B today. We are getting behind the behaviors that we exhibit when we're in relationships, and not just romantic relationships. These are parental relationships. These are platonic relationships, aka friendships. So we're going to get into it because I am honestly blown that I thought I knew my attachment style this whole time, and come to find out I didn't actually know it. I knew it, but I only knew it in a certain dynamic. Okay? So if you've ever wondered why you chase, why you run, why you self-sabotage, why you cling, or why you just shut down in relationships, or if you do none of the above and you're just an angel, but you want to know why you're an angel, if you want to define why you're an angel, then this episode is for you. So I know a lot of people know about love languages. We're going to have an episode on love languages, but a lot of people don't know about attachment styles. And I actually didn't know about attachment styles until I went to therapy. No shame on you or no knock to you if you aren't familiar with what attachment styles even are. I learned it in therapy, thought I worked through it in therapy, but I think that we were just tackling a particular relationship and how I was showing up in that relationship versus how I actually am overall. So let's get into what attachment styles even are. I have my laptop with me today because I wanted to make sure that I speak to each of these accurately and not just off the top of my head. So I'm fact checking myself throughout this entire episode. So I recently read a book called Attachment. It's by Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller. And it talks about attachment styles. And this is something that I wanted to look into because I knew about it. We talked about it in therapy. And it's something that's just come up for me recently because of dialogues that I've been having with people. And I was like, I actually want to talk about attachment styles and what I understand about them. And I feel like aspects of my attachment style have been showing up in certain situations lately. And so I was like, I want to understand what this is. So I read this book. And actually, your attachment style is typically developed in the first 18 months of your life. 18 months to roughly 2 years of your life. It's developed in your caregiver relationships at a very young age. So if you're a parent listening to this, don't worry. You don't have to be perfect. You were doing things with the tools that you had, and you were doing the best you could. But a lot of our attachment styles are developed by our caregivers in very formative years of our lives. So after reading Attachment and then taking the test, I was like, oh, wait, this makes sense. So you'll have like a general attachment style. You'll have an attachment style that comes from a maternal figure, a paternal figure, so a mother figure, a father figure, an attachment style for romantic relationships, and then an attachment style overall. So, super interesting. And I'm going to get into all of it. So it's how your subconscious shows up in relationships, in the way that you interact, in the way that you love, in the way you receive love, and also in how you handle conflict. It's basically like how your nervous system responds to certain relationships. So there's 4 attachment styles: secure, anxious, avoidant, and fearful avoidant, which is also known as disorganized. So let's get deeper into where your attachment styles come from. Each one stems, like I said, from the first few years of your life and the relationships that you had with your caregivers. So if you had consistent caregiving, usually you have a secure attachment style. If your needs were constantly met, if your emotions were regulated, and if there was room for your emotions, if you were made to feel safe, if you were made to feel that you could be your authentic self, and if you, again, felt like you were cared for, it typically leads to having a secure attachment style. If you had inconsistent caregiving, so a little bit of hot and colds, a little bit of conditional caregiving, meaning if you do something, it will warrant a type of response from your parent, whereas if you don't do something, it'll warrant a different response. So if you don't do something, it warrants a negative response. If you do something well, it warrants a positive response. And there's like this inconsistency in how your parent responds to you that often leads to anxious attachment style. If your parents were overall emotionally unavailable, if they were dismissive, if they didn't always meet your needs or rarely met your needs, if they didn't give you adequate attention in the first few years of your life, then often you have avoidant attachment style. And if you had an abusive household, or not to that extreme, but a very unpredictable, chaotic household, if you were raised in an environment where things were based off survival, or if you had a caregiver who didn't have their needs met and ultimately couldn't meet your needs, then that leads to disorganized attachment style, which is also known as fearful avoidant attachment. Because there's avoidant attachment style and because there's fearful avoidant, we're going to use disorganized as the term for fearful avoidant and then avoidant as just avoidant. That way it's not confusing. Because I will get tongue-tied up here if I keep trying to go back and forth between those. So there's dynamics between each caregiver, right? So again, an attachment style with one parent can be different from another parent or another caregiver. So your attachment style with your maternal role, maternal caregiver, whether you're raised by your mom or not, whether you're raised by an aunt who played a maternal role, whatever that may be, you may have a different attachment style from that maternal caregiver than you would your paternal caregiver. And that really shapes the attachment style that you ultimately have generally, but also in the ways that you interact with people who may kind of reflect those roles in your life, whether that be like male friendships, female friendships, partners. It can show up in a lot of different ways, the way you interact with siblings. It's really, really interesting. A lot of us were raised to be a parentified child where you had to emotionally regulate yourself and often felt emotionally neglected or that there wasn't room for your emotions. Even if you lived in a household that looked fine from the outside, if emotionally you were not made to feel safe, it can trigger these different attachment styles. So trauma, emotional attunement, and cultural influences can really impact your attachment style. But the good news is your attachment style is not permanent. And we're going to get into how you can change it if you fall into an attachment style that you want to grow out of or that you want to work on. So how to identify your attachment style? A few questions for you. What do you fear most in relationships? Do you fear abandonment or do you fear loss of freedom? Do you shut down when things feel uncertain or do you spiral when things feel uncertain? And do you need constant reassurance or distance to feel safe? So if you're having emotions come up, do you feel like you need reassurance to help you navigate those emotions, or do you need distance to navigate your emotions and ultimately feel safe? I also really recommend the quiz that I was talking about to figure out your attachment style. It's called the Attachment Project. I'll put the link in the bio below. That way you can take the quiz, and it'll really walk you through a series of different questions as it pertains to each type of relationship that you have, and then ultimately give you your different attachment styles. It's free to take, so I really recommend taking it. It was very eye-opening for me, obviously, because I thought that I had a different attachment style than I actually have. But definitely recommend taking it. And if you don't have the time to or the resources to, those are just a few questions to ask yourself, and then take note of how you answer those questions as I go through the attachment styles. So let's get into each attachment style. The first attachment style is secure. I was talking about this earlier, but secure attachment style, often in a parental relationship or in a caregiving relationship, your needs were met, you were seen, you felt supported, you felt safe, and it's led you to have ultimately a secure attachment style. People with secure attachment are typically emotionally available. They are able to communicate well, they trust easily, and don't have too much difficulty regulating their emotions. They're pretty good at regulating their emotions. So the response to stress or the response to conflict is usually pretty even keel. You're not spiraling, you're not distancing, you're able to navigate and flow through it and communicate through it. Secure attachment styles can handle both space and closeness. So if their partner needs space and distance, they handle that pretty well. If they need closeness and more intimacy, they also handle that well. So either way, a secure attachment is going to be pretty steadfast and secure in themselves, no matter how their partner shows up. Also, secure attachments are not easily thrown off by conflict. Like I said, they kind of know how to navigate it, move through it, communicate, and are able to self-regulate. So they're not as reliant on their partner, or their partner doesn't influence their responses very much. So a good example of this is if you have secure attachment style, let's say your partner doesn't respond for a few hours, like you're texting them, you're going back and forth, and then a few hours go by and you haven't heard from them. Usually a secure attachment would be like, oh, they're probably busy, they'll get back to me when they can. Like, they don't overthink it or sweat it too much. They're just like, okay, like, I'm good, no worries, I'll talk to you when I talk to you. That's usually a secure attachment. Secure attachment sounds lovely. There are relationships in my life that I feel like I have a secure attachment for sure, but I wouldn't say I necessarily show up that way always. So secure attachments, you have hit the lottery. Congratulations. But and not to say like secure attachments can't get triggered or have their attachment style show up in different ways in different relationships, but for the most part, a securely attached person is just a securely attached person. So if you're questioning like, oh, am I securely attached, but you feel like everything I just described is you, then yeah, baby, you're probably securely attached. Congrats. I love that for you. It's a beautiful thing for sure. And I strive to be more securely attached. I am going to have to reparent myself in a few ways in order to achieve secure attachment style. And I will own that and say that, but that is a journey that I'm working on. And I hope to be able to be securely attached in every type of relationship that I have, not just a few relationships that I have. So I am very thankful that I do have some relationships that I feel very, very securely attached. And those relationships are relationships I tend to model, or I tend to want to model my other relationships off of. Like, they help me set the tone for other relationships. And it's not just how they show up, it's how I feel in those relationships. Which I shouldn't have to like rely on external validation, which That's going to get into my attachment style in a second, but I shouldn't have to rely on like how somebody else shows up in order for me to show up best. But it doesn't mean that like I can't work on that. So working on it. But there's definitely relationships that I have that I feel very securely attached. Thank goodness. They set the tone for everything else. Okay, so the next attachment style is anxious attachment. This is also known as preoccupied attachment. Anxious attachment often needs reassurance. If you have anxious attachment, you fear abandonment, you fear not being liked, you fear that if you do something wrong, the people in your life will leave you or they won't approve of you. Anxious attachment also looks like overthinking. So every little thing that you do, every decision you make, you overthink because you're so anxious or fearful of how people are going to respond to the decisions that you make. Sometimes people with anxious attachment are they can be labeled as clingy, they can be labeled as intense, or they can be labeled as people who just need constant reassurance. Triggers for anxious attachment style is silence. So if you're not hearing from someone for a while, you'll really start to feel it. You'll wonder, what did I do wrong? Am I missing something? Are they okay? Are they upset with me? And you start to overthink. Another trigger is inconsistency. So if someone is really inconsistent in their communication or how they show up for you, if they're feeling hot and cold, it'll really trigger you and again lead you to that overthinking kind of spiral. And also lack of clarity. And like, I don't think anyone enjoys lack of clarity, but if lack of clarity really triggers you, and again, you start to like dissect everything, you're like, what does this mean? Do they like me? Do they not like me? Am I this? Am I that? Etc. You probably have anxious attachment style if some of these things or most of these things are very familiar to you, or if you're sitting here listening and you're like, wait, yeah, that's definitely me. An example of this is, okay, same thing. Your partner doesn't respond for hours and you're like, are they good? Did I do something wrong? Are they upset with me? And then if you're a really anxious attachment, you're literally texting them like question mark, question mark. Like, are you good? Like if you haven't heard from them, you'll literally call them and be like, what's going on? Like, where are you at? What's happening? Are you okay? Are we okay? Are you mad? Did I say something? Are we good? A lot of people who have anxious attachment style dealt with very hot and cold emotional upbringings, meaning they often had to prove themselves in order to receive love, that their actions warranted certain responses. And in order for them to receive validation and care, it required something of them. So anxious attachment style is if I don't do this, they're not going to love me. If I don't behave well or respond well, then my needs aren't going to be met or they're going to leave me. And as a child, that can feel really intense, not having those needs met. And so you become very fearful, you become very anxious because you're not having your needs met emotionally or physically, mentally, etc. Avoidant attachment style usually shows up as fear of loss of independence, and intimacy can feel suffocating. So if you're an avoidant attachment, if someone is really clingy, or if someone wants to spend all their time with you, or if someone needs a lot of reassurance from you, it freaks you out. And it causes you to withdraw because to you, you don't want to lose your independence. You having space away from people allows you to feel safe. Avoidant attachments are usually emotionally self-sufficient to a fault. It's like when emotions come up for an avoidant attachment, they freak out and run from them. Like, if emotions really start to feel real, in order to feel safe from getting hurt, avoidance will quite literally avoid. They will avoid their emotions. They will pull all the way back. They will draw into themselves. And an avoidant attachment can feel and does feel a lot of the same things that the other attachment styles do. But the way that they show up is by not showing that they're feeling those things. So they'll just completely pull back, isolate, distance, and ice you out, because that's what allows for them to feel safe. And that usually stems from them having a dismissive or emotionally unavailable caregiver growing up. So someone that didn't pay enough attention to them, someone that didn't meet their needs when their needs existed and didn't recognize them or didn't show up for them. And so they've learned how to self-soothe and cope themselves. And so in adulthood, they just fully pull away, because that's what allows for them to feel safe, because intimacy is not familiar to them. Support and closeness is not familiar to them. And so because they've learned how to like regulate their emotions, they choose to completely isolate in order to be able to do so. But how that shows up in relationships is it feels like totally pulling away and icing people out. And so avoidant attachments actually get a really bad rep, like on social media. TikTok hates avoidant attachments. But the truth is like, they're just people who did not have someone in their life as a caregiver growing up. Often this is the case, not always, but that didn't really meet their emotional needs or were emotionally available to them. And so the only way that they've learned how to regulate their emotions is completely alone. So give avoidant attachments grace. They are so frustrating, I understand, because I tend to go for avoidant attachments and I don't know why. No, I do know why. It's a recipe for disaster. I'll explain in a second. But triggers for avoidant attachments is if someone needs them too much. If someone relies on them too much, it freaks them out. So if you're dating someone who's an avoidant attachment, if you come on too strong, especially in the beginning, or you require a lot of their time or require a lot of their attention, an avoidant attachment will start to build strong relationships with someone. And when things start to feel emotionally real for them, they pull away. Often you'll see this in relationships, and like I see trends of this all the time where like, oh, me and my situationship, like we were starting to get so good, things were getting good, like, and then all of a sudden they just like completely backed off. It's usually an avoidant attachment who was starting to feel the things and they're like, oh shit, I'm starting to feel the things, and they just back off. So yeah, that's an avoidant attachment. And then there's the fearful avoidant, which is, like I said, the disorganized. This one is tricky because this person desires love, like they deeply desire love, but love scares the shit out of them. And it's because they've associated love and fear being very, very interconnected. It can be super chaotic. It can be very hot and cold. And a lot of it is trauma-based with like a natural upbringing of this push and pull dynamic. So as I was mentioning earlier, people who are disorganized attachments usually had a very, like I said, hot and cold upbringing. They had almost like their caregiver was likely either in survival mode themselves or couldn't fully give. And so they were very in and out, in and out. Needs were met sometimes, but not all the time. Love was given heavily and then it was pulled away. And so a disorganized attachment almost like repeats those patterns of like, I want to love, but I'm scared of love because every time I get love, it hurts me. And so they like go back and forth a lot. Any emotional intensity is a trigger for someone who has disorganized attachment style, good or bad. So if it's very, very loving, if they're experiencing a lot of intimacy and love, it can totally freak them out because they're so scared of what will happen on the other side of that, and vice versa. So anything that's like very hot and cold is going to be very triggering for this person. And they also kind of tend to repeat that pattern. A good example of this is someone who will say like, I love you, and then like disappear for a week. Like they get really emotionally intimate with you and then they just fall off because that deep fear of love sits in them and they don't know how to handle it. So these are the 4 attachment styles. Honestly, after I've explained them, before you continue, pause this video, pause this podcast, and either DM me or comment on the YouTube video or both and tell me which attachment style you think I have. I'm very interested to know because I'm about to tell you in a second, but I want you to pause and tell me what you think it is. And then I also want you to pause and write down what you think yours is and let me know. Then take the quiz and actually figure out which one it is. But if any of these sound like you, if you sound like you're an avoidant, or you sound like you're an anxious, or if you sound like you're secure, I want you to know that there's nothing wrong with you. A lot of this stems from, like I said, the way that you grew up. And nobody has a perfect upbringing. Nobody has a perfect home environment when they're a child. And even if it looks like it was great from the outside, there are still things that happen because at the end of the day, we're all human. And I feel like my generation and the generations following me are really the first to like do the work and are the first to truly have access to therapy and not have a stigma around therapy. And so you have to understand that a lot of us are doing the best with what we have. And so if you're currently a parent, know that, you know, the impact that you have on your kids, if you have young kids, if you're about to become a parent, the impact that you have is really important. And so taking time to heal and know how to emotionally regulate and teach your kids how to do that will set them up for success long term. But also, it's never too late to navigate some of these relationships. If there's things that you're looking at and you're like, shit, like, my caregiver maybe didn't meet my needs or whatever the case is, and you still have them around, it's not too late to have some of those conversations and understand maybe why they did what they did or what their upbringing was like and what lessons they learned from that and what things they may do differently, because that can also help you kind of reparent yourself in some ways. So there's work that can always be done. And I don't want you to think that just because you have this attachment style that you can't change it or that you can't get better in certain areas or that you're absolutely doomed from the start, because you're not. Neuroplasticity is a thing. Your brain can change. The way you emotionally regulate, the way you show up, all these things, it can change. So we'll get into like how things can be adjusted, but I want to get into my attachment style. So I took the quiz and come to find out, I am literally right on the line of anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, but I sway more anxious. And so what I've learned about myself and about how like my emotional needs were met, and it kind of gave me an outline. An anxious attachment style can stem from and is characterized by the following things: inconsistent formative period, which leads to low self-esteem and low self-worth. Need for external validation and reassurance from others to attempt to prove themselves worthy of love and affection. Fear of rejection and criticism. Self-sacrifice and putting the needs of others first. Attentiveness to loved ones, almost to a fault. Others may end up taking advantage of this kind of generous nature because of this trait. Now, some of these very much so resonate with me. Some of these I feel like I've really worked on. So I used to be a total people pleaser. I used to be someone who always sought external validation from others because I felt like I needed to earn love. If you go listen to episode 27, the Am I Healed Enough episode, I talk about how I grew up feeling like love was something I needed to earn, that it wasn't unconditional, that I had to do things right, or I had to do things perfect, or I had to be perfect in order to be loved. And so this, I didn't realize, led to me having an anxious attachment style. And attentiveness to loved ones, almost sacrificing my emotions and my needs for the betterment of other people's, is something that I've just always done. I'm working on it. I've gotten so much better at it. And so me saying these things vulnerably can be hard for me because I'm like, damn, like, am I needy or am I someone who like needs external validation? Am I someone who's insecure? And the reality is, I think we're all a little bit insecure. Like, I have my insecurities for sure. I'm not someone who necessarily feels like a fear of abandonment. At times I have. It's more of a fear of loss because of trauma from when I was younger and losing family members. And so all that to say is that anxious attachment usually comes from also a need of control because things often in their lives felt very out of control. And so I didn't realize that I swayed more anxious. And I think it's because certain relationships and certain ways that I've dealt with the emotions have swayed avoidant. And so I don't feel like now I have low self-esteem or self-worth, but to be honest, I did for a lot of my life, which is funny because it's like I've always been confident and self-assured in a lot of ways. But when it came to things that were tied to emotion, that is where I didn't feel secure because emotions, and I talk about this in episode 27, vulnerability was really, really hard for me. And I think it's because I didn't always feel safe to be vulnerable, or it just wasn't like a common experience for me. And so things that are tied to emotion bring me angst. And at times, like, I will totally like draw back and like won't act on things. So for the example of earlier, I'm like, oh, if I don't hear from someone, I do get anxious. But I'm not the person to be like, where are you? What are you doing? What's up? I used to kind of be like that. And like my first relationship, I was like that. But I also was like young and didn't know how to regulate my emotions. Now I do. But my natural instinct is to be like, damn, like, what's up? Like, why haven't I heard from you? Like that sort of thing. So I do kind of have an anxious attachment style, specifically with romantic partners. But I also think it depends on the partner because I was with someone that didn't trigger that at all for me. And I was super securely attached. Like, I had no angst. Like, if I didn't hear from them, I didn't worry at all. And maybe this is because they had a secure attachment style. And so it like balanced out. But yeah, I think it just like depends obviously on who you're with. The ultimate recipe for disaster is an avoidant with an anxious. Like, oh my God, it is hell. Literal hell. An avoidant with an anxious is the most common toxic relationship dynamic. One chases, one runs. One pulls away, one pushes too much. Like that friction that you see often is an avoidant and an anxious together. And I recently was just talking to someone and started to realize that while I liked this person, while I think they're a great person, and while I truly believe, like, I don't knock them whatsoever, I just don't see myself progressing with them because they're very avoidant and because it's triggered my anxious. And I just know that that's a recipe for disaster. Like, I can't do lack of clarity because one, who the wants lack of clarity like ever? But because I feel like I've gotten a lot better with my attachment style and certain things that this person was doing was triggering my anxious attachment. And I was like, no, like, I'm just not going to put myself through this. Like, we're just not aligned, and that's okay. Although you can like someone, although there can be good chemistry, at the end of the day, you don't want someone who like triggers you and triggers you consistently, especially early on. So avoidant and anxious attachment styles together, not a good combination. Avoidance and avoidance also will just be stale, dry, no communication. Like they'll both just retreat, never talk about things. And the best way I can describe two avoidants being together is like a roommate type of romantic dynamic where you start to feel like you're literally roommates because neither of you are addressing things, neither of you are communicating through things, and neither of you are even willing to lean in and be vulnerable enough to share your emotions with one another because you both feel safest when you isolate or when you're independent or when you have space. So avoidant and avoidant can really show up as like stale, tough dynamic to be in. And then anxious and anxious, or like two anxious people together, is really difficult because it can be super intense, very emotional, but can lead to burnout quickly because you're both trying to meet the anxious needs of one another. And it can often look like codependency as well, like not being able to operate without one another, each other's emotions set one another off or make each other triggered. And a secure with anyone just works. Like secure attachments, angels, literally angels, because you can pretty much be with anyone because you're securely attached. And we all have the capability of becoming securely attached. But I want to be really clear, just because two avoidants are together, just because two anxious are together, or just because an avoidant and an anxious are together doesn't mean that it won't work. If you are aware, if each of you are aware of what attachment style you have, how it shows up, and what your needs are, and you're willing to navigate it together, you can work through it. Like you totally can work through it. One of my really good friends is a therapist, and she's like, an avoidant and an anxious can be together, but you just have to really work at it. Like you have to work at how you're going to show up for each other and how you're emotionally going to regulate and doing emotional check-ins, be really good and committed to communication. Like it's very, very possible. It just requires work. And so knowing your attachment styles is going to be important because if there is someone that you really have a deep connection with, but they're an avoidant and you're an anxious and you want to make it work, but if you don't know that they're an avoidant and you're an anxious, then all these issues, these points of contention, this friction is going to bubble up and you're not going to know how to manage it because you don't know these things about each other. But when you're able to learn, when you both have the awareness of it and you're able to get it out on the table, you can figure out how to navigate it. So I don't want you to walk away from this and be like, oh my God, I'm an avoidant, I can never be with another avoidant. Or I'm an anxious, I can never be with another anxious or with an avoidant person. Like it can be difficult, but it's possible, especially if you both are working on becoming secure. So a question often is, oh, can I get a secure attachment style? And the answer is yes. Like you may not be born with it. And for me, it may not have been my natural upbringing or the way that I experienced caregiving at an early age, but I've learned to love like with a secure attachment style. Like I love as a secure attachment. Best ways to build a secure attachment style is through therapy, of course. Working with a professional to help navigate your traumas, your triggers, your childhood, of course, is a very beautiful thing, but not everybody has access to therapy. And so if you don't have access to therapy, learning how to regulate your emotions. To me, emotional regulation has been huge for me in navigating my anxiety, moving my body, meditation, journaling, prayer, breath work. These are things that I do on a consistent basis that have actually helped. Like, I'm not just saying that I'm doing these things, I'm actually doing these things and taking the time to. The other day I called my dad because I was like, you'd be so proud of me. I was like triggered by a certain situation. I was feeling anxious about it. And instead of like spiraling and overthinking, I went outside, I did yoga for 10 minutes, I meditated for 10 minutes, and I felt so much better. And that sounds so cliche, but I genuinely felt so much better in that situation. That's emotional regulation. Like that is a win for me. So I'm taking the steps to get there. You can take the steps to get there too. Another thing is communicating your needs clearly. Make sure that if there are things that make you feel a certain way, or if there's things that trigger you, communicate those things, because Unspoken expectations lead to future resentment. If you don't speak on what may bother you down the road, then ultimately it'll lead to resenting your partner before they've even gotten the opportunity to fix it. And not just your partner, it can be your parents. Take the time to navigate that. It's also not too late to navigate some of this stuff with your parents and understand things about them and why they did things the way that they did, and understand their attachment styles and how you two can work on that. Like, all of these things require work, and the work is often way easier said than done, but it is possible. It definitely is possible. Also, pick safe partners. And I'm not saying settle, but I'm saying pick a partner that's aware enough that you can communicate with, that you can work on these things with, instead of someone who isn't aware, who's ultimately going to like heighten your triggers or whatever the case is. Just be very mindful of where you spend your energy, and don't just focus on chemistry, like focus on how you actually can show up for each other. Also work on self-trust and boundaries, like trust yourself, literally learn to love and trust yourself, and set boundaries in situations that you know are going to trigger you or bring up this anxious attachment style. For me, I've had to set boundaries lately of like, these are just things that I don't want to deal with. Like, these are things that I don't want to feel unclear. I don't want to feel uncertain. And if someone is making me feel that way, I probably don't need to be with that person. You know? So just like setting those boundaries, and then heal your inner child. Understand what your inner child didn't get. And then talk to yourself as if you're talking to that inner child. What does she need? How can I show up for her? How do her needs and emotions need to be met and seen? How can I hold space for them? Stuff like that is so important. And like, that's stuff that I'm literally actively going through right now, is like reparenting myself. So it's a journey. It's not easy. Shadow work too. We'll talk about that in another episode, but shadow work is definitely real and helpful. Yeah. So like, we all can work towards, build, and develop a secure attachment style. It's never too late. But it's a journey. It's not going to be easy. I know it's going to be one that I'm on, right? Because for the last 28 years of my life, or whatever, 27 years of my life, I've operated a certain way. So like, it's going to take a while for me to rewire my brain and not automatically go to that anxious attachment style when certain things trigger it. So it's a journey. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm going to continue to work on it though. Like, that is just a commitment that I'm making to myself, and it's certainly a commitment that you can make to yourself too. So after listening today, I encourage you to reflect, to figure out what your attachment style is, and then to look at it without judgment. Don't judge yourself for things that are pretty much out and have been out of your control. Like, the way that it was formed is not something that you chose. It just worked out that way. It's something that your body does by nature. Your nervous system sets you up that way. Okay. But now that you know about it, that's the most incredible first step. Awareness is power. So use this awareness to be able to navigate and understand and do more for yourself. Simple as that. No judgment. Just own it. Communicate it. Be able to say like, hey, these are my needs, or this is how these things make me feel. I'm not going to be perfect in this situation. Like, can you navigate this with me? Or this is what I may need in this situation when this stuff comes up, etc. Like, communicate what you need, understand your triggers and the certain things that will bring out this sort of attachment style, and then make deposits every day to work on it. You don't have to be perfect, but definitely don't judge yourself, because you can't hate yourself into healing. So don't judge yourself. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you learned a little bit more about your attachment style and how to navigate it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, follow the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and share it with a friend who doesn't know about attachment styles, who needs to learn more about attachment styles. Maybe even share it with a parent and be like, hey, and listen to it together and be like, hey, which one do you think you have? Which one do you think I have? Like, how can we navigate this together? So Make sure that you share because, like I said, awareness is power. So allow for other people to get a level of awareness as well if you got one today. But thank you so much for tuning in. I always appreciate you being here, and I cannot wait to chat with you next week. Bye.